I, 33M, my wife, 30F, and her family are obsessed with the idea that if her older sister was alive, I would be with her instead. I'm worried about her. How can I help? My wife and I have been married for nearly 2 years, and in that time, we've built a life filled with love and joy, especially with the arrival of our little baby boy. I adore my wife, and I often find myself marveling at how, in any lifetime, I would still find her and fall in love with her all over again. But beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life lies a troubling issue that has been weighing heavily on my heart. My wife, who is now 30, had an older sister named Mia who tragically passed away at just 11 months old. Their home was struck by a landslide, and while my wife never had the chance to know her sister, Mia's presence looms large in their family's narrative. As the only two daughters in a household filled with boys, the impact of Mia's death created a dynamic that is both deeply emotional and, at times, unsettling. When I first met my wife's family, I was welcomed warmly, but the atmosphere quickly shifted to something I found unsettling. Much of the conversation revolved around Mia. I remember sitting in their living room, listening to my mother-in-law reminisce about her lost daughter, showing me photo albums filled with images of a baby who never had the chance to grow up. It felt strange to me. I was eager to see pictures of my wife as a child, but those moments were overshadowed by a continuous stream of stories about Mia. At dinner, the comments became even more pointed. If Mia were here, she would be so much smarter, my mother-in-law would say, and I would glance at my wife to gauge her reaction. To my dismay, she would nod in agreement, her smile strained. It was clear that my wife had internalized these comparisons, and it troubled me deeply. Over time, as we planned our wedding, the situation only intensified. I often heard comments like, "Mia would have loved this," or "Mia would have looked beautiful in that dress." Even my wife's grandmother chimed in with her own comparisons, stating that Mia would have been so much prettier. Each time, my wife would affirm their words, her agreement a mixture of pride and sorrow. I could sense the emotional turmoil beneath her surface, and it made me uneasy. I broached the topic with my wife one evening after a particularly difficult family gathering. "Do you ever feel like they're putting too much emphasis on Mia?" I asked gently. She looked at me, her expression a mix of sadness and understanding. "I know it's not fair," she admitted, "but I can't help but think about how beautiful and smart she would have been. I think if you had met her, you would have loved her more than me." Hearing her say that shattered my heart. I wanted to scream that I loved her, not some ghost of a sister who never had a chance to grow up. To help her navigate these feelings, I suggested therapy, hoping it would provide her with a safe space to explore her thoughts and emotions. It took some convincing, but she eventually agreed, and for the past 2 years, she has been attending individual therapy sessions. Our life together had settled into a comforting routine after we moved 8 hours away from her family for my job. I believe that distance would allow us to create our own narrative, free from the constant reminders of Mia. However, that hope was short-lived. When my wife's brother got engaged, the focus shifted back to Mia as the family began planning a memorial in her honor, which they had also done for our wedding. I tried to remain supportive, even as I felt the old wounds reopening. My wife was deeply involved in the planning, and it brought back the comparisons that had once faded into the background. I watched as she began to echo those self-deprecating remarks again, placing herself in direct competition with a memory. It was painful to witness. At the engagement party, while family members fawned over our son and remarked on how cute he was, the comments took a turn. My wife's mother exclaimed, "Thank God he took after you." I smiled, feeling proud of my son, who had the most beautiful brown eyes. Eyes that reminded me of my wife. But then, without missing a beat, her mother added, "It's a shame he didn't get your eyes, though. If this was Mia's child, he would definitely have blue eyes." I felt a surge of anger but swallowed it down, knowing that my sweet wife was listening. Instead, I responded, "I think my wife has the most beautiful eyes, and I'm grateful our son has them." My wife seemed to appreciate my words, as if she needed that affirmation. Yet, her mother quickly redirected the conversation back to Mia, commenting, "If Mia were alive, I'm sure she would be holding her baby with you now. You would love her so much." It took everything in me to keep my composure. I knew that grieving is a complex process and that everyone has their way of handling loss, but the constant pedestal on which Mia was placed felt incredibly unfair to my living wife. I could see my wife's discomfort, but it seemed she felt trapped in her family's narrative, unable to voice her own hurt. I discussed my feelings with my wife after the party, trying to tread carefully. "I just want you to know that I choose you every single day," I said, hoping to reassure her. "You are the woman I love, and nothing can change that." She smiled, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I know, but sometimes I can't help but feel like I'm living in her shadow." My wife's two younger brothers, who were born after Mia's passing, had expressed their own discomfort with the constant comparisons. They'd grown up witnessing the emotional turmoil their mother experienced when they defended my wife. Their attempts to stand up for her in the past were met with their mother's emotional outbursts, sometimes resulting in her going on hunger strikes. It was a pattern that had left a lasting impression on them, making them hesitant to speak out against their mother's comments. As my wife and I continued to navigate these family dynamics, I realized the importance of encouraging her to embrace her individuality and worth. I wanted her to see that she didn't have to live in Mia's shadow. I started to point out her strengths more often, reminding her of the wonderful qualities that make her unique. We began creating new family traditions that honored our son's identity without overshadowing her. Over time, I noticed some subtle shifts in her perspective. While she still loved Mia and honored her memory, she began to see herself as more than just a comparison. Her therapy sessions helped her process her feelings, and I could see her gradually building confidence. She learned to share her thoughts with her family, even when it was uncomfortable. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, she took a deep breath. "I think I need to talk to my family," she said, her voice steady. "I need them to understand how I feel about the constant comparisons. I love Mia, but I'm not her, and I want them to appreciate me for who I am." I felt a surge of pride at her determination. "I'll support you every step of the way," I promised. In the following weeks, my wife prepared for the conversation. When the day finally arrived, I was anxious yet hopeful. She called her family together and expressed her feelings with grace and strength. "I love Mia and cherish her memory, but I need you to recognize that I am my own person," she said. The room fell silent, and I held my breath, unsure of how they would react. After a long pause, her mother finally spoke. "I'm so sorry, dear. I didn't realize how much my words were affecting you. I never meant to make you feel less than Mia." The acknowledgement was a significant moment, and I could see my wife visibly relax. As conversations continued, her brothers chimed in, offering their own insights. They shared their experiences of feeling overshadowed by Mia's memory, and slowly, a shift began. The family dynamic started to change, and while it would take time to fully heal, I was proud of my wife for standing up for herself. Months later, during a family gathering, I could feel the atmosphere was different. The conversations shifted away from constant comparisons, and I watched as my wife smiled more freely, sharing stories about our son without fear of how they would relate back to Mia. It felt like we had finally found a way to honor Mia's memory while celebrating our family's individuality. As I held my wife's hand that day, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Together, we had navigated a challenging journey, and I was grateful for the strength we found within ourselves and each other. Life is complicated, and grief takes many forms, but our love continued to shine through, stronger than ever.